What's up? My name's Andrey Azizov. I'm a musician and designer based in Brooklyn, New York. This past few years, I've worked with some really awesome artists and brands and built a really cool community along the way. So I just wanted to talk about my experience as both a musician and designer and things that I've learned over the course of my career so far, hopefully in a way that's helpful to up-and-coming artists and show the importance of design in the music world. I think definitely as a designer, I'm pretty biased on the subject, but I will say that I think just generally that album art is like super, super important, especially for smaller artists and like artists just getting started. I think we live in like a very visually and aesthetic kind of obsessed world right now. So, the album art is kind of your first judgment that someone's having. And I think it can really even make or break if someone clicks on your song, like takes that effort to just double click your song. Or even just get past like the first 10 seconds, even if they already are listening to it. I think people are just going to make a judgment based on what your art looks like. I know there's definitely many examples of me kind of just skipping a song just because I'm not really into the art and I don't like the first like 5 seconds of it. So I will already make that judgment. And at the same time, I think there's been plenty of times where I will try to give a song or album a chance just because I like the art and I want that like art in my recently added or recently liked or wanted in a playlist, for example. And I think like a really good like example of this is, for example, I'm going through a playlist, like let's say like a new music playlist, and I see some kind of handcrafted or hand painted art, that immediately will kind of denote to me that this is like an indie artist or someone that like really cares about their craft and is like someone I should give my time to and kind of explore a little more deeply. Whereas, for example, I see art that looks like it was just like cranked out and like put together by a label graphic designer that's like probably overworked and has all these deadlines to hit. I'm probably less likely to give that song a chance because I'll assume it's like something more poppy or like mainstream or whatever, which isn't like a judgment call, just kind of like how I think about it. And I think how a lot of people do think about it. So at the end of the day, I think even subconsciously, especially like for people that are like visually inclined, you're making like a judgment based on like if this person cared about their cover art, which is like almost like the first step, they will care, even if it's minimal or even if it's someone that's not like super design oriented, they care about their music because they cared about something as like seemingly insignificant as cover art, that they'll care about their music too, which is like obviously what you're there for. I think it's just kind of at the end of the day, it's just like a way to stand out, which is super important when there's like hundreds and hundreds of artists that people listen to like a day. Yeah, like I said, it definitely is an important first impression, but not just of a song, but of an artist as a whole. And if you want to grow as an artist, I think it's really important for your audience to identify with you. Um, and cover art is kind of like the first building block of that. That's what they're going to see before they ever, go on your social media or, check out a whole album or anything. So I think it is kind of has like a heightened importance like that because every piece of art you put out, every, cover art, music video, tour poster, anything kind of contributes to your audience's perception of you. And that's super important if you want, people to identify with you. And I think the reason your audience identifying with you is so important is because that's kind of what takes them to the next step of supporting you. So, even just telling their friends about you, because people want to feel like they have like this cool new artist that they're excited about and tell their friends about. And they probably won't do that if they don't identify with your aesthetic, for example. And then beyond just that, that's like what will motivate them to buy merch, go to your shows, follow you on social media because they identify with what you kind of do visually and then outside of that. So I think, yeah, the cover art is just like the first building block of that. And is like holistically kind of combines into your identity as an artist and other people identifying with you. And outside of like the music side of that, I think also your cover art is like a really good opportunity to kind of make a moment on its own. So I don't see a lot of smaller artists doing this, and I think it actually could be very cool if more artists, smaller artists, were doing this, because it's like creating a moment around your cover art. So obviously big artists like Halsey, Drake, Kanye do this like pretty regularly with like super memeable cover art. But I think like there's a very cool opportunity for smaller artists to make something that's like maybe provocative or funny that can get attention on social media outside of the music, that will draw more of an audience to their music. And I think cover art can do that. Good cover art doesn't just have to be, aesthetically pleasing. Like maybe it is something that's provocative and gets people's attention, because it's like also a very important marketing and sort of like public perception piece that can go viral on its own and create listeners and an audience that way. So that's, I think, two ways that it can impact an artist's career, and like growing and creating an audience that identifies with you. Yeah, I think your art can definitely, if you're trying to break into a certain genre or a certain like aesthetic and space, for example, yeah, like indie pop or like maybe hip hop and rap, or like some sort of underground kind of hip hop and rap, or even pop. There's like a lot of signifiers that are present in the art. Like, so if someone is seeing art for the first time, I feel like you can kind of, obviously there's exceptions to this rule, but if you see art for the first time, like, for example, I think I could identify, and most people could identify, like a metal like album cover art as opposed to like a pop cover art. Like there's just different visual signifiers and stuff that kind of can help categorize and, help people discover you just through your art. So I think that's definitely a good example of that. Because yeah, at the end of the day, it's like a signifier of your song and your aesthetic and genre. So it's definitely a good balance of like being similar to others around you and also standing out in a way, because you don't want to be doing like, you don't want like some sort of like crazy aggressive cover art if you're trying to appeal to like a big like pop audience. Whereas, and also like you don't want, a super bubblegummy kind of like cover art if you're trying to appeal to more indie kind of leaning artists and an audience. So I think that's like an important distinction, definitely, when you're creating and thinking about your cover art. I think color, I don't think of too much, but I think that's pretty subjective, like color wise, because I think like, for example, different songs like sound like different colors to me, but I think that is also kind of like a self-fulfilling thing. When I see cover art, I'll probably identify the song to that cover art. Also, it kind of brings me to a different point, is like the cover art can kind of influence how people see that song. For example, like if someone just hearing a song for the first time with no sort of visual cues or anything, they'll probably create their own image in their head. Whereas if they're seeing something paired with cover art or like with art, that can kind of influence the way they see that song being. Like, I think it would be like an interesting experiment to like pair like completely different genre cover arts to like a completely different genre of music, because I think it definitely does like subconsciously influence your perception of music when it's paired with some sort of visual. I think what's inspirational to album art and cover art in general to me is just the ability to create a world around your music. And that just like adds so much depth to what you're doing and who you are as an artist. I think, like, for example, something that I really love that artists do is when their single art kind of builds up or hints to the final cover art, or like there's a series of, things being revealed as the singles go on. I think that's just like a really cool way to use your cover art in a way that can get like people engaged, fans, even just like people that aren't fans, just like creating intrigue. I think is like a really interesting like opportunity to create someone like interest in you. I think like creating a sense of mystery around your music is like another really cool way that you can use cover art. And I think especially for smaller artists, like being mysterious with your cover art, like not revealing everything or hinting at things, is a really cool way to create interest in you as an artist. And I think that's something that I like would love to see like smaller artists trying out. I think like a lot of artists have definitely like broken like that with kind of iconic and mysterious kind of cover art. So I think that's definitely a really cool thing that like inspires me when I see new cover art for artists I don't know. It's just so inspiring that you can create something out of nothing. Like when you sit down to write music, you have endless opportunities, and likewise when you're sitting down to make cover art, you have just so many opportunities to create like something completely unique that no one's ever seen before. So that's why I think like people should take cover art as seriously as the music, because like, it's just so much more interesting when you have something like effort put in rather than just, slapping like the song name over a press photo or something like that. So that's what really inspires me, is just like the endless opportunities you have to create something new and unique. I think like a few different examples of the kind of building single art into the final album art. One of my favorites that I've seen, I can't remember the artist, but each single, and I've definitely seen this like from a few artists, but each single has its own little symbol in like the corner, for example, is like really small. And then the final album art has like all the symbols arranged together. I think Jeremy Zucker actually does something like that. Um, so I kind of just, I like the idea of like using symbolism and tiny little things like that, like to denote the different songs. And it kind of makes that whole album like at the end feel just even more special, because like each little single is its own moment. So that's like another really cool one. I think other art or other examples that I've seen is just like the single art is just kind of small portions of that final cover art. And I think it's just really cool because you're almost like slowly doing a reveal of the final piece. And it just adds just so much more depth and like intrigue as people are trying to piece things together. Definitely, I think for bigger artists, like with like a big following, that's like super helpful, because, there'll be a lot of like chatter and social media talk and everything about the what the meaning of behind everything is too. But like I said, I think like the mystery and intrigue can work just as well for like a smaller artist, because I think just anyone presented with some sort of like puzzle like that is going to try to figure it out if they're interested enough. So I think that's definitely a good marketing idea. I think it's definitely a good way to tell your story. If people don't have like the luxury of like doing a whole music video with like all this like pieces of symbolism, and it's just a way to show the audience what the song means to you, because there's like definitely rare opportunities to be able to do that. Like literally the only other thing I could think of is like a music video or an interview where you're going through exactly what the song means to you. But I think it's like super cool that you can kind of insert your take on the song and like what it means to you personally just through the art. For example, like just creating like the symbolism around it visually, so that people will at least like kind of have a sort of context around what inspired the song or what it means to that artist. So I think that's just like a really cool way to insert more meaning into the song and like give it more depth. Like I said, I think the whole thing is that just like it adds another element, more depth, that can even like go beyond just the song itself and like create the narrative around the artist. Sure. I think there's so many that I see every week that kind of super inspire me, but I think like I have a few recent ones that I'm really into. So the first one that comes to mind is 2.5 by Amine. Nick Holiday, creative director for this one. Shout out Nick. It's honestly like one of my favorites that I've seen recently for a bunch of reasons. I think it really like does hit like a bunch of the things that I talked about. It's weird, but like in the absolute best way. It's like visually interesting. It's abstract, so you kind of like have a bunch of different ways to think about it. Like the brain exploding like could mean many different things to different people. And I think it like matches the music perfectly. It's off kilter, and it's also like perfect as far as like colors. Like it's like super bright colors. It would stand out in a playlist. It would stand out if you're scrolling by it. And it also feeds into Amine's brand. That yellow is like super identifiable to him. I feel like that like I've seen that since the beginning. That the yellow is kind of his sort of like brand thing, and I think it helps with the overall image of the album. So the next cover art that I really like recently is Uncanny Valley by Coin. Shout out Andrew, who's the creative on that. I think it's just super, super interesting. Just honestly, like the minimalism of it is perfect. It kind of feeds into the concept of the album, like where it's just uncanny. It's definitely like an interesting thing to look at and would also stand out, I think, in playlists, especially at that smaller size that you see on playlists. It would catch my attention. It's also super versatile. Like it's been used on like, I think their merch and tour posters and everything. So that's like another point for it. And at the end of the day, it's just like super unique. I've never seen anything like it. And it kind of is taking this mundane object and making it into an interesting cover art. So yeah, kudos for that. So the last cover art that I'm really into recently is Ethereal by Snot. I think like the color is just perfect. It takes it a step beyond just like a regular photo by just adding texture and more like intrigue and kind of that mystery into it. I think like the colors are just perfect and super eye-catching. Again, it's something like if you scroll by, it would catch your attention. And also like points for minimalism too, because it works at smaller sizes and it's something that you just want to click on. Definitely like one of my absolute favorites from this like recent kind of few months. So I think like what all three of these kind of show is that minimalism is kind of key, especially when these are like smaller, going to be seen at smaller sizes, thumbnails. None of them have text on them, which is definitely like a creative choice. I think there's, especially me, I love fonts and typography. So I kind of love putting text on my cover art, but I think these ones, like the creative is so powerful on its own that it doesn't even need that. So I think, yeah, like definitely takeaways from all these is just like stark colors, minimalism, and just like an interesting element that can grab people's attention and create a narrative around what the album means and like building towards that artist image that they're working on, creating. Yeah, so I wanted to go through a few of my own cover arts that I've designed and created myself. So this first one is for my project called Before It's All Over. And I think this one works for a lot of the same reasons that the other ones that I was talking about work, in that it's like minimal, it's stark and like interesting. It creates intrigue and, can be up for interpretation for anyone looking at it. But it means something to me and kind of signifies like the meaning of the project to me. This one also doesn't have text because I thought like the image was kind of interesting enough. It's this photo that I took with this awesome photographer, Nick 80s. And then the car is superimposed into the background in Photoshop. And yeah, I think it just like kind of works because of the different like elements working together and creating an interesting visual story. So this next one is for a song I have called Too Loud with this artist Simone. And this is kind of completely different the other ones that I've shown so far in that it has like a lot of text and it's kind of very busy. But that was like a conscious choice because I was looking at, as references, a lot of like old punk posters. So I found like a lot of references of punk posters. There's a lot of collage together text, imagery, a bunch of different fonts. So for me, that was like a signifier for the kind of music that I wanted to be kind of grouped in with. So that's kind of that was my decision, conscious decision, to create album art that had those signifiers and looked like this. And it also, I think, stands out a lot because of that, and is different than a lot of different art that would be like around the same genre. For kind of like my quick and dirty tips and tricks when I'm creating cover art, at the very technical, I'm usually using Photoshop because you're working with like pixels and like complex imagery. Um, the standard size that I'll say that works for most distributors is around 3,500 pixels by 3,500. So that makes sure that like no matter where the art is, it'll still look high resolution and look good because you put a lot of work into it. Obviously, you want it to look good. Um, just to reiterate, like a lot of the points that I was saying earlier, I think when you're working for creating album art in like the digital age and for things like Spotify, you want it to work at a small scale. So you want something that is eye-catching at, you know, the tiny thumbnail scale as like people are scrolling by, but also looks good when it's, you know, blown up. Um, so yeah, just like everything to remember is like that you want to create album art that's has a purpose, adds depth to the music, adds kind of like to the image and perception of you as an artist, and also kind of is a good signifier for like the genre you're in and the kind of aesthetic that you want to create around your work and the world that you want to create around your work. So I think those are all just good things to keep in mind, and even going through like a checklist when you're creating art is super helpful. Way to just make sure that you kind of check off all the boxes when you're creating art. But at the end of the day, it's super subjective. So if you have an idea, I think like trust your gut and create what you think works.